My name is Kika Ojo. I'm your facilitator for tonight. And this is the Independent Street Checks Review Community Consultation or Public Consultation. Just to kind of give you a brief sense of what's going to happen this evening, I'm just going to open up and then Justice Tulloch will come and officially welcome you and tell you about the review. At that point, after which my colleague Danielle Dowdy will come up and give you some information, some more technical and logistical information. I'll pop back up to get you started, and basically what you're going to be doing is engaging with the people at your table around the questions that are at your table. So there's some information at your tables that you're going to be working with. You'll have some time to do that together, and then we'll do a report back across the room so that everyone gets heard. And there are members of the team. You'll notice people with white tags. They are the team members, so we are paying attention, taking notes to support Justice Tulloch's review. And the other thing I think that's really important is that if you would prefer to listen in French, that there are headsets at the back and a real-time translator at the back of the room as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Justice Tulloch to welcome you. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank Kike for that introduction. I too want to echo her sentiments in thanking all of you for coming out, notwithstanding the inclement weather. I can indicate to you that Ottawa, well, aside from it being the capital of Canada and a very, very important city, it's dear to our hearts. You have been a very important contributors to the last review process that we engaged in on the civilian oversight of police and review. And so we're here again to get your input on this new review that I have embarked upon from back in September. Now, before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we're on the land which is the traditional and ceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. I also recognize the contributions of the Métis and Inuit and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community, the province, and the country as a whole. Now, by acknowledging this traditional territory, we're recognizing and respecting the First Peoples of this country. It is also the recognition of their presence and contributions, both in the past and the present. However, we must recognize that acknowledging the traditional territory of these lands is only the beginning to recreating a respectful relationship with the Indigenous peoples in Ontario and in Canada. My name is Michael Tulloch, and I'm a judge who sits on the Court of Appeal for Ontario. Now, I was asked, as indicated a few months ago, back in June, to be an independent reviewer of the regulating street checks, which means my position is independent of both the government and the police. Having said that, I want to acknowledge that Chief Bartolo is here, and as well as Eli L. Chantry, the Chief of Police and the Chair of the Ottawa Police Services Board. We thank you for coming out. I want to also acknowledge all the members of the Ottawa public that is here, the leaders of various organizations, which I think it's critically important for us to hear your voice and for us to hear your perspectives on the issue that we'll be discussing tonight. Now, as an independent reviewer, I will be reviewing the content of the regulation, regulate in the practice of street checks. And I will be doing this to see whether it reflects the important goal of ensuring bias-free police community interactions, as well as the fact that whether or not police and public interactions are consistent and conducted in a way that promotes public trust and confidence, while at the same time respecting individual rights and civil liberties. I will also be reviewing the regulation with a view to determine whether or not police services chiefs and police services boards are in compliance with its terms and are following the terms of the regulation. Now, I will be conducting a very comprehensive review of this regulation, and in order to do that, I have assembled a team of experts together, a number of whom are here this evening, and you will see them by virtue of the fact that a lot of them are wearing a white name tag. Now, since September, we have been engaged in a very extensive consultation process throughout the province, and now we have embarked on our public this is the 11th of our public consultations. And we're doing 12 of these meetings. And so certainly you guys are towards the end, but you're definitely not the least of the consultations. We have one more next week, which will be in Sudbury. I intend to draw on what I have been learning from these consultations to formulate a report with recommendations on the regulation. Now, this report will be submitted to the government on November the 30th, 2018, and it will be made public or made available to the public sometime thereafter, and certainly no later than January the 1st, 2019. Now, by way of background, the regulation is intended to govern the police and public interaction when the police is seeking to obtain a person's identifying information in situations where a legal statutory authority or law does not oblige the citizen who's being questioned of his or her personal identifying information, his name, to provide it. So, for example, if you're stopped pursuant to the Highway Traffic Act by a police, you are under legal and statutory obligation to provide your personal identifying information. If you're being investigated on someone's property that is not your own, the police under the Trespass of Property Act has the rights to ask you for your personal information. So in those types of situations, it's not arbitrary. And as citizens, you're obliged to provide your personal information. Now, the regulation outlines what an officer must do if they ask for your personal identifying information. The regulation is not intended to stop the police from speaking with the public or the public from speaking with the police. The regulation is intended to stop the police from randomly and arbitrarily collecting personal information from members of the public who they speak with. The regulation also provides information and guidelines on the storage of information that comes from street checks. As well, it provides the mandatory training for all police on the new rules. It also includes the development of policies and procedures by police services, as well as police services boards. And it also provides the requirement for the public reporting by the police services of the interactions that they engage in and the data that they collect. Now, with that background in mind, I'm looking forward to hearing from you this evening. Like I said before, your comments, your suggestions, your experiences are what we will be relying on to compile our report and to make the necessary recommendations to the government. So your voice is very, very important to us, and we ask that you feel free to have an open and frank dialogue. And when you report back to us, I will be making notes which reflects the seriousness in which I take your views, and I will ensure that your recommendations, your comments, and your experiences are documented and reported back. Again, I want to thank you for the sacrifice that you've made to come out here this evening. You know, at first we thought that we wouldn't get a lot of people because of the weather, but it's obvious that you are all engaged and concerned citizens. So again, I thank you for your presence.
Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir tout le monde. Bonsoir. Avant qu'on commence, je vais faire une petite annonce. Sachez qu'un service d'interprétation vers le français est disponible. Veuillez vous munir d'écouteurs que vous trouverez à l'arrière de la salle si vous souhaitez d'écouter en français. So, my name is Danielle Dowdy, and I'm with the review team, and I'm just going to go over really quickly the logistics of this evening. So, as Justice Tulloch mentioned, we have been on tour throughout the province. We've been to we've got 12 cities scheduled, and next week will be our 12th. Tonight is our 11th visit. Part of the consultation process is also our community surveys. So if you go to our website, you'll see www.streetchecksreview.ca. You'll see that there's an opportunity to take a survey. And part of the consultations is not just hearing from folks, but it's also, there's a heavy emphasis on a data collection piece. And so this survey here will assist us with that. So when you have a moment, we ask you to just go to our website and complete our survey. So the point of the public consultations really is to hear from folks. We want to know your opinions and your recommendations and thoughts and experiences on the regulation, and is it still going on? You know, what is the impact of the regulation, and any thoughts that you would like to share with us. Just as a disclaimer, the review team, we will not be looking at individual cases. So if you have a story or an experience to share, we would love to hear that experience, and it's really important for us, and it will inform our recommendations in our report, but we're not in the position to actually resolve that situation for you. So there's different mechanisms that are in place already, and we encourage you to follow those up, but the review team does not actually deal in individual cases. And so the agenda for this evening, we're going to be, this is the introduction, and then you'll see on your tables, there's different, there's a pad, there are pens, lots of paperwork. So you see an engagement guide and also a public consultation questionnaire. So we're going to ask you to just work through those questions in the on the questionnaire. You don't have to work through them systematically if you don't want to. If at your table there's one question that you really want to drill down into, that's perfectly fine. But we ask that you go through the questions. They really mirror the regulation, and so you'll see that what it is that we're reviewing by the themes that are kind of presented in that questionnaire. There's going to be about 45 minutes to an hour to do that exercise at your table. And we're going to ask that you elect somebody to actually take notes. And once that hour has passed, we're going to have a report back, a time to report back. So if someone at your table can just present back the conversations that you had and share with us the really salient points on the discussions that you had. And Justice Tulloch will be at the front of the table, at the front here of the room, taking notes on everything that he's going to be hearing. And so you know, we are on social media. We tweet under the hashtag StreetChecks. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're actually on Facebook Live right now. So if you look at the back of the room, there's a gentleman, Andrew, if you could just wave. So this is where the camera is for the live stream. If you don't want to be on camera, just be sure to keep your back to the cameraman there. You'll also see some of our teammates, again, those of us with these tags, will be taking pictures. Those photos are for our social media feeds. If you don't want your picture, if you see someone taking a picture, you don't want your picture taken, just let us know, not an issue at all, and we'll move on. But if you want to see where the pictures go, that's where they go. And so we live tweet every meeting, and you're welcome to join in on the conversation. If there's anything that you would like to share, join us on social media there. And again, so our website is streetchecksreview.ca. And if you leave this evening and you still have some more thoughts on things that you want to share with us, you've had time to reflect on the discussions that were had, we're accepting email submissions at info@streetchecksreview.ca. And we're accepting those until May the 31st. So you have a bit of time if you go away this evening thinking, there's still some things that I would like to say and share. And that's it. So thank you so much for coming out this evening. We really appreciate it. Again, there's food over this way. And did you want to? Okay, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Justice Tulloch. So this is your time now. So if you're at a table and it's either you by yourself or there's only two people at your table, you might want to join a more populated table. That will probably help the process. As Danielle stated, you will be talking about the questions at your tables. You do not have to go through the questions one at a time. You can use your discretion as a table. It's best if you pick someone to take notes and also pick someone in advance to do the report back so that there's not a fight at the end. I will pop back up at about 7:35, so just shy of an hour, to get us moved on to the next and final, to the last phase, which is the report back phase. Does that make sense? Is everybody good? Okay, so some of us will be floating around for the first few minutes just to make sure you're settled, and I'll be back up at about 7:35. Thank you. We are ready to start. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there a table that would like to go first? Awesome. And there's Dave. So let me just say a couple things. Dave, 1 second. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. So for this portion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, we're going to be keeping it to about 4 minutes per table. I typically give a yellow card, quote unquote, at about the 30-second mark. That will be your indication to start to wrap up your points for your table. Really consider paying close attention to what other tables are saying. Thank you so much. Thank you. So that we can keep the flow going, and it's easier for us, and in particular Justice Tulloch, to hear what people are saying if everyone else is sort of quiet. So we will ask people to respect that one request. So we have a table ready to go, and you can take it away. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Mina Rajalu, and I'm a member of the public. I'm just going first because I have to leave at 8. So just to let you know what our table talked about, everyone obviously had heard of the street checks, that's why we're here today. But most didn't know of the regulation beforehand unless they had worked specifically in that area. And I guess part of the conversation was also that this was less of a topic in Ottawa, maybe not quite as heightened sensibilities around it as there was in Toronto. But one of the people at our table did talk about that a lot of people probably don't know that they're part of the regulation when they're interacting with police, so that can be maybe why they also are not aware that it exists. The people at our table agreed that there could be some benefits to street checks that, can help ensure the safety of the people around there, but unfortunately what has happened over the years is that this has been used to primarily target people of color, and that it's been used in an arbitrary and subjective way so that that people were nervous about interactions with police. And I thought one of the most interesting things at our table was that I guess I knew this intellectually, but I hadn't really heard it, that there is a specific Black experience with interacting with police officers, and it's something that I haven't had. So I really appreciated that. We skipped around a little bit, but one of the things that we looked at was how to increase awareness among people, because there's no way that people in the public know about the regulation. They probably know about street checks, definitely don't know about the regulation, and how we can increase awareness around that. One of the things that we suggested starting with is looking at the demographics of the people who are actually targeted by street checks or by carding. And trying to access them in those ways. So for people who are young, looking at their social media, looking at how to reach out to people that way, into schools, at colleges and universities. For people who are older, probably the news, like the local news, I guess, on TV. Community associations, talking to parents and saying, hey, this is something that we all need to be aware of. One of the things I'm just adding now, sorry guys, is looking at vulnerable populations, if they are the ones who are more likely to be in touch with the police on these things. So like at food banks, at shelters, at community centers, etc. One of the things that was interesting on this topic specifically was kind of a disagreement or a question about who should lead this awareness. And it was, should the police do it? Should they just be part of it? Should there be a third party who leads it and tries to help rebuild the trust between the policing community and the public? So this was something we agreed to disagree on because we weren't quite sure where that line would be, and honestly, who's going to fund it, right? So that was something to put out there. And then we talked about training and about whether it is useful to have training on this. Everyone agreed, obviously, you want training on this for your police officers. But one area that we thought probably needed a lot more support was on the monitoring and oversight of the regulation and the implementation, because there are police officers out there who intentionally or maybe carelessly aren't following the regulation, but they're not self-reporting that they're not following the regulation. And then the people who are being carded either don't know their rights or don't know how to go about accessing a remedy for this. So we, those were our suggestions, but essentially monitoring and oversight.
Thank you. Thanks. Who's the speaker for that table? Thank you.
I'm just going to keep it brief, but we spent a lot of time talking about trust and how it's very difficult to implement a regulation for a police force when there is a severe lack of trust in communities. So I think I'm just going to keep it there, but we wrote some notes down and we'll pass it along.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. We'd like that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Latanya Grant. I'm going to answer a couple of your questions. Have you heard of Jermaine Carby? That's what number one should say, because Jermaine Carby actually lost his life because of the street check. Police shooting of Jermaine Carby began with carding, officer testifies. My cousin lost his life because he was the passenger of a vehicle. This policy or this new regulation that you guys are talking about that has to do with kind of condoning street checks, it says that it's only supposed to be during these things should only happen during a traffic stop. My cousin was the passenger of a vehicle during a traffic stop. They satisfied all the information that they needed from the driver in this traffic stop and still chose to card my cousin. Now, Jermaine Carby would have never lost his life if this practice had not been implemented or even created. So this is something that we think that should be struck down, not just fixed. These things, nobody wants to be carded. Nobody wants to speak to officers if they don't want to speak to them. You guys shouldn't be forcing yourself to speak to us. There's a lot of things in this that makes no sense, you know, because everything here is just contradicted by the last couple sentences. So my family actually feels the pain of losing a family member to this practice. And it's unfortunate. We just flew in from Toronto because I wanted to be here in the capital to be able to show people that these things are affecting our community. 14 of there's 14 recommendations in my cousin's coroner's inquest, and majority of them had to do with urging training for the cops on unconscious bias. Carding affects more more black people or indigenous people than it affects anybody else. We're the ones that are racially profiled. We're the ones that are stopped. We're the ones that are harassed, and it needs to stop. Someone died. Someone lost their life because of this. So any officer that's in the room, you need to realize that because of this policy or regulation, someone lost their life. Every time you go to a family dinner, you're gonna see your family. I'm not gonna see my cousin because he died by the hands of a cop. People who are supposed to serve and protect, they're now harassing and murdering us in the streets. And that's why there's that disconnect. We'll never feel safe to speak to an officer because they have an attitude their attitude just, I can't even explain it. It's just like an empowering attitude. I have a gun, you have to listen to me or else I'm gonna shoot you. That's not what should be happening. Cops should be trained on how to deal with people who have mental health. My cousin had mental health issues. They did read this when they pulled his name up on Icon, but they still chose to card him. And I'm just very upset about this. That's why I had to be here today. I had to show you guys that this actually affected somebody personally. This is not just something we talk about, street checks and carding. Someone died. Someone lost their life because of this. So it needs to end.
Thank you.
Actually, first of all, I want to say thank you to the sister and folks for coming from Toronto and giving us that story, and sorry to hear about your cousin. Good condolences. That speaks to, we answered, first of all, our understanding of the carding is that it's a tool, and like a gun, it can be used for good or bad, right? So we spoke to the question of what does street carding mean to you? And pretty much unanimously, everyone's saying the way it's being used is, or the effect of it is that it's like a surveillance tool that is targeting our civilians with no clear mission. It's a tool used to control certain communities, especially youth, black youth, which is obviously the case there. Again, it's a targeting tool that marginalizes our community. It's no longer being used as an intelligence tool. It's an extension of bias and other what's that? Certain populations control. Oh, right, and it engenders fear, right? So, and it's right, and it's often in the way it's applied is illegal, right, because it's violating the Charter of Rights. Do we think it is useful? We think it's, again, as a tool, and again, I want to point out we have a former police officer, right? It could be useful, but again, the way it's being used, it's being abused. All right, who's in the charter? Collect tool and use info. Okay. Going on to number 3, are you aware of the new, okay, people were aware of the new regulation. Okay, for your community members, that's all right. In terms of how to make folks aware, actually, folks touched on a lot of things that we were going to get into there. Community media, actually using the churches, mosques, synagogues, and schools, community organizations, and community media. We have Sarah here. Do you think it has any benefit at all? Again, it was, again, we had some people said if used properly, yes, but it has good intentions, but it's getting us, it's not getting us, right at the moment, it's not getting us where we want to go the way it's being used. And there's no benefit at all if no crime has been committed. So, number 7, what obligation should police have when they do card people? They should identify themselves and say why they do it. They should be respectful, and they should be applying this, using this tool equitably and legally. Have you been stopped? Let's go for that. The receipt. Do we think the receipt? What do you think about the receipt? It should have the key info, why the information that the police took, the reason that they were stopped, and how long the information will stay in the system. But we had, again, our former police officer told us that the reality is that the police they don't like this kind of paperwork, and what they'll do is they get around doing it. So they, as much as we want that information on the receipt, if they're not doing the receipt, that's not going to achieve that. Number 10. What are your thoughts on the receipt? No, nothing but. No, sorry. It's number 10. All right, good. Okay, recommendations. How to maximize compliance. So good supervision, including disciplinary action. If the tool is not used properly, we want strong disciplinary action. We want to diversify the senior leadership of the police force, right? Because and we certainly see everything, the whole thing, yeah, all the police force, yeah. We want to know more about how they share information between the local and the provincial police forces. We want to study, have a study done on how effective the process, even when used properly, is at all for achieving its goals. And how about, what was this one? The data by June 1st, was that?
So the data that's been collected since before the regulation was put in place, what happens to that data? Because a lot of it was collected illegally and unlawfully, so we just want to know if that data will be purged.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Table.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gurdeep. I'm from United 6. Now, before we start answering these questions, there's one very crucial, important point that we need to make, that this survey, this questionnaire, does not address. Now, this survey questionnaire is asking us about what we think about these regulations. Well, it's an important fact to know that we all want carding to be banned. Carding must be banned. That's what we want to see. It's not good enough to have a regulation. Having a regulation does not do enough. We need to see it banned completely. All right, now we're going to start answering these questions. All right. All right. So number 1, yes, we here do know what carding is. Now, if you go on the street, you go into a random place, anywhere in the city, you ask a random person, you know what carding is? They'll say, what are you talking about? And also, if you ask someone who's been carded before, in many instances, a lot of them don't know what carding is. You have to explain what it is, being randomly pulled over, ask for your information ID, like, oh, that's what happens. A lot of folks don't even know that they're being carded. It's true. What does carding mean to us? It means being stopped and asked for identification without cause. But we're being stopped because there's suspicion. There's suspicion that we might be a criminal, that we might be doing something wrong. Now, what does the suspicion mean? Now, say we start asking a police officer, why are you being pulled over? Why are we facing this? Then there's going to be a pushback. Then that makes us suspicious. But isn't it our right to be able to ask a police officer, why are you being pulled over? That's a big issue. Number 3, what about the new regulations? Here in our table, some of us knew about it, some of us didn't. Now, if we're mixed over here, what about the general public? The general public don't even know what carding is, so how are they going to know what the new regulations are? And we asked answer number 5. Do you think carding has any benefits? We answered no. Straight up no. It has the opposite effect, actually. I can give you an interesting story. I asked someone about their perspective of police officers after being carded multiple times. And this is what he told me. He said, you know what? I don't trust police officers. If there's a crime going on in my neighborhood, I don't want to call a police officer. I'd rather go personally myself to try and take on the person who's trying to break and enter into a person's house. I wouldn't call a police officer unless I really need to. And that's the scary thing about this, is that when carding happens, when people face this on numerous times, people's trust in police officers goes down. I know folks personally who wanted to become police officers. They're young individuals, they're good individuals, they're trying to do good for their community. But they've been stopped by the police officer. They've been handcuffed and put in the back of the police car when they didn't do anything wrong. Their information was taken down, and they're like, you know what? I don't want to be a police officer anymore. The police are terrorizing me. Why should I be a police officer anymore? They lost their interest. I'm one of those persons who actually lost interest in being a police officer. I wanted to be one, and I lost my interest in it because of, this is one of my reasons why I lost interest. Now, this is our recommendations. Recommendations. Retention of the data period. We don't want the data to be in the police hands anymore. There's evidence of the data being used to prevent people from getting employment. There is evidence. It is actually happening. So I heard stories of folks who went to go apply for jobs. When they do a security clearance, it comes on their record. You've been carded, like you've had police interactions. Even though they didn't do anything wrong, that comes up, and that makes the employer very fishy. So when they go through a security clearance, they don't get their job, and that really impacts racialized minority community groups. Next important point. This is very important because this needs to be taught, especially in high schools, and it should be going to the public. Education to the public of what a police interaction should be. A lot of us don't know how to interact with police officers, especially when we're being carded. When you're being randomly pulled over, I'm going to tell you this, it's very scary. It can be very, very scary, especially when you don't know what you're doing. When you see a person walk up to you who has a gun on the side, a baton on the other side, and you're being pulled over for no reason, you look at them, you're like, they have authority, I have nothing. When you're facing a racial incident with a random person, people will step in. But if you're having interaction with a police officer when you didn't do anything wrong, no one's going to step in. So you don't know what to do in that interaction. So we're going to ask you to train the public, tell them what they can do in this instance.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to give your maybe one or two last most important points, and we'll take your notes, okay?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to give my last point. Carding needs to be banned. Just to clarify, carding needs to be banned.
Thank you.
Wait. See, that's
Police services boards should be held legally
She can take the mic.
accountable.
You can take the mic, ma'am.
So our last one will be, police services boards should be held legally accountable for the training that the officers take and the results of the carding.
Thank you.
Okay, so we felt that there was confusion about what the street checks are, what's a street check and what's just stopping an individual. And I don't think that there's clarity. There certainly wasn't clarity at our table. We struggled through it a bit. So that is confusing, and that does need to be clarified for the public. And it's a difficult thing to grasp onto. Let me just, one of the things that we did feel was the public certainly does not know, and that one of the ways that's a bit long-term would be to start in the schools and educating the students on a yearly basis as to what this all is and what their rights are. Educating the general public is important, but if we start in the schools, then maybe in the future people will have a better understanding as they get it ingrained in them. And for people coming to the country, newcomers as well. They get a lot of information, but this is one of the parts that they should get. And it should be available in a number of languages, Braille recordings, etc., as well as in workplaces. We did think that there was some benefits to the street checks or carding, that it is an intelligence gathering, both past and future, and it's a proactive policing, and it does act as a deterrent. There are cons to it, though. It can trigger people who have been carded before or who have been in conflict with the law before, or anyone who's stopped by the police. It's intimidating and it's a bit scary, and we all react differently. And so police need to understand that even if you're stopped in a car, for whatever reason, you're nervous. It's important that the police should be out there having a positive presence in the community, and that's the way to build the trust. So walking around and talking to everybody at every opportunity is important in building that relationship, and that also helps them know the people in the community. And so community policing is an important part of knowing who's who in the community and when things aren't quite right in the community. Okay. So when police stop and talk to people, we suggested that they should give a business card all the time. Even if it's a positive interaction, give the business card, because then you've got something to go home with. Just telling the name or reading the badge isn't very good, because by the time an hour has passed, you may have forgotten that. So just handing out business cards all the time would go a long way. And it gives the person the ability to contact the officer back again. And again, builds a relationship. They must respect the right to privacy. Tell the people their rights if you're asking questions. And respect people's decisions if they don't want to talk to the police. And one question is, when collecting identification, how is that going to be used? This was something we talked about at length, is how is it going to be used? How long is it kept for? Who has access to it? And how do we get the information on what's recorded about us? Some of the people in the group said yes, they had been stopped. But it was in a car, so as we understand it, that is not actually carding. Correct. If it was in a traffic stop, even though there were questions about why the traffic stop happened.
Can I give you a yellow card, ma'am? So, like, 30
Okay,
seconds.
we'd love to
Thanks.
see the receipts. That was the big thing we talked about, because you're asking about the thoughts on it. We haven't seen a receipt. So that would be important on that. And we suggested that the police should have the video cameras on themselves. And that would go a long way to providing a lot of information about how those interactions, it's almost like an audit of the interactions. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Calvin Lawrence. I'm an ex-police officer, 36 years. If you see my hat, you'll see it says minimize the conflict. So that is my goal. I've been working on it since 1970 between the police and black communities. The first thing that I would ask is, I work from the ground up. I work from the ground up, not from the top down. So if you want to know some information, the first thing I would say is, what does the charter say? What does the criminal code say about street checks? So you get that down. Now, Privacy Act. The Privacy Act has what they call a PIA, Privacy Impact Assessment. Look it up, Privacy Impact Assessment. Some police organizations have to do it. Some police organizations just may do it. But if you want to get the trust of the community, if you do a Privacy Impact Assessment, then you will find out exactly all those questions you had, gathering information, who gets the information, what are the ramifications in relation to a new process under the Privacy Act. Now, in a landmark decision, R versus Brown, Justice John Morden writes, unanimous Ontario Court of Appeal firmly recognizes that racial profiling is a reality in policing in Canada. That's R versus Brown, the justice. So it's not me saying racial profiling is a reality. It's the courts that's saying that, so it has to be looked into as a possible process. In the Vice newspaper, it says, police forces in Ontario have been sharing information obtained through the practice known as carding with federal police organizations' intelligence service, according to the new report. According to the 2014 document, the Toronto Star, the information is sharing intelligence with the Canadian Security Service and the RCMP and the Ontario Provincial Police. But if you use that process that I'm telling you now, you'll get all your information. Now, if you want to know, why not just put the form up here that the police use to fill in? If you want to know, why not get the form if they put it in their notebooks, or do they fill out a form, put it up there and show everybody. There's no secrets, right? All right, put the form up there. Lastly, I'm an ex-police officer. If people are out there in the game, then they're going to be searched for by the police within the law. If they're not, and they're being picked on, then you simply ask, am I free to go, until you get an answer. And if you're arrested and you did nothing, then it's SEIS, sue everyone in sight. If you're in the game, I'm going to try and put you in jail. It's as simple as that. Thanks. Now, this gentleman's going to...
Thank you, Calvin. Good evening, folks. My name is Paul. I'm going to pick up on a bit of what Calvin said and what the group concluded. We were very skeptical about the data collecting. We're not sure on where this data goes, who it's shared between, and how long it's kept. So some clarification in that area would help the public. And we were also not very pleased with the level or the effort that the provincial government has taken to share this regulation with the public. I'm sure when it comes time for voting, they know how to get to us, but when it comes to regulations as such, it's almost hard to know what's going on. So not many of us were aware of this regulation and of carding actually in itself. And so again, more money and more effort in getting this knowledge out there to the public. We concluded, I think, based on the conversation and a simple cost-benefit analysis, that carding overall is just ineffective. We don't think that it's effective enough to be kept as a policy, and I think we all agreed that it should just be stopped and ended, as many of others have said here. And that would probably summarize. Actually, just to share an example from an anonymous person who was stopped in front of their house and asked for ID to prove that he lives there, as if the onus is on him in this situation. So it gets a bit complicated in the relationship between police officers and the individuals being carded. And for that matter, we feel that it takes away from the public trust in the policing system. And again, it becomes ineffective. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Litsia Auguste, and I'll be speaking for my table here. And I mean, just in an effort to be conscious of time, I think I'm just going to stick to what hasn't been mentioned, or quickly go over what was mentioned. So I think our table really discussed the importance of going back to community policing. So having officers being part of the community, interacting positively before they, resort to carding. So if people in the community are used to interacting with police in a positive way, then they're more likely to trust the police. And like I think we mentioned earlier, people that don't trust the police don't call the police, and therefore that's an issue. And I think something else that there was a lot of confusion here as to when does the regulation apply, when does it not apply, when are people required to talk to police or to give their information and when they're not. And it goes back to what's been mentioned a lot of time is the need for education. So education not only with the police in terms of when they can and cannot, card or street check, and then education within the community and different spheres, so youth, people with mental issues, marginalized communities, so they're aware of their rights. And something that was mentioned is that despite the benefits of this practice, it should never trump human rights. So I think that's what needs to be at the base of all the interactions. And something else that we talked about is with data collection. So with regard to, I think the last point, the report that's going to be made public every year is who's interacting with police. So data on race, areas of the city that have more interactions, again, mental health issues, whether it's a first interaction or more than one interaction, and whether these people have criminal records or not. Not that it justifies, but I think the more we know about who's being stopped, who's being carded, who's being street checked, the better we can have a hold on it and regulate it. And something that was mentioned, I think at the table over there, is not only do police need training, but they need to be held accountable. So if they are misappropriating this practice, they need to be, punished, or if they need more training or whatever it is. So there need to be not only training, but also tools to make sure that they're being held accountable and oversight as well.
Thank you.
You cannot. No.
So at our table here, we had 9 participants. Some of them have vacated, standing against the wall. But we had a very hearty discussion, I think is the best way to describe it. On many of the topics that we covered, we tried to use the questionnaire as a framework, but I'm just going to touch on some of the things, so bear with me as I go through this novel here.
4-minute novel.
4-minute novel.
Okay.
I'll read quickly.
Thank you.
So in 2010 here in Ottawa, there were 8,240 street checks. In 2011, 6,748. 2012, 6,950. I'll speed up here to give you an idea of where street checks are at now. In 2017, there were 6 street checks. So from 2010 to 2017, we went from 8,240 to 6. The whole purpose of this street check was to gather intelligence, right? Valuable intelligence is what we heard. So if it was so valuable, how did we go from 8,240 to 6? Something's not working. And that's what came up at our table here. The process is flawed. It's not to say that the street checks and gathering of intelligence is wrong, because it is preventative in some cases, but the process clearly is flawed. So, on the notion of databases, that's what really came up. Where is this information being stored? In 2010, they weren't issuing receipts. There were no there was really no process like what we have here today. So what we heard in our discussion is that the database where the data was held in 2010, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in a separate database where old data is stored and it follows the retention policies of that time. So the outstanding question is, what do we do with that data now? If it didn't follow the regulations today, what do we do with that old data? The verdict is still out. Next, we talked about awareness. We're very good at doing street checks, but we're not so good about informing young people about their rights. So we said the focus of this exercise should really be about informing young people about when and how to interact with police officers and what their rights really are. The school was one of those stakeholders. So we wanted to see from these recommendations that the school board, the Ministry of Education, is invited to these conversations. So they're not happening in silos. The social determinants of health are right across all sectors. So we can't talk about street checks and not talk about how it impacts your health. We can't talk about street checks and not talk about how your awareness is in your school system. On comprend? OK. Puis en français, c'est la même chose. Si on n'a pas l'information en français dans les deux langues, Ça ne fonctionne pas. Imagine que tu es arrêté par un policier, puis tu n'as pas l'information, tu vas toujours regarder comme tu es peut-être un suspect. So suspicion is subjective. If you stop me at 17 years old and you don't know your rights, your hands might start shaking. You might have a crack in your voice. Is that grounds for further questioning? Or is that grounds to let that young boy home? Awareness. Now, on the curriculum, this was a great point, we said there should be a know your rights component. In the same way we do EQAO testing, to test about math and literacy, we should apply the same vigor to ensuring that our young people know their rights. The system is already there. Just expand the curriculum. Finally, in this report, it says that the annual report should be shared online using the internet and in any other means. But the problem is not many people have access to the internet, and that's not good enough to get this information out there. So we do believe that data collection is important, but you have to ensure that the information is shared. So I'm going to end on this point, on data collection. So someone said, how long do we keep the data for? Well, we were lucky because we had Chief Bordelot at our table here, so we asked him that exact same question. He said, data is stored for 5 years. Correct me if I'm wrong at any point. Data collected prior to 5 years ago is frozen. We don't know what frozen means. So after this conversation, ask the chief what frozen actually means. I'm not sure. Who stores this information? That was a question we wanted to address. In this document here, it says that the database is under police control. Well, we had some other suggestions. Maybe the Human Rights Commission should store this information, maybe universities, maybe the independent review board, review director, I don't know. Anyone but the police, essentially, is what it boils down to. We should all have access to information. Now, not all points were bad. We said good points on this.
Sir, can I get maybe 2 of those good
Where's
points?
my yellow card?
And can we take, this is it?
Okay,
And
just
can
making
we
sure.
take your notes out of your beautiful novel?
Oh, you're gonna have to chase me down for that.
Thank you.
The good points. Number 10, a chief of police shall ensure that no performance targets based on any of the following factors is used to evaluate work performance of a police officer on his or her force. We thought that it was good. You should not be rewarded for doing exorbitant amounts of street checks. Doesn't make sense. That should be a metric that you use to evaluate whether someone should get promoted or not. But what I do want to acknowledge is qualified people being promoted. Well, here in Ottawa, we had a very important promotion that took place, and I think it's very timely to announce this. It's already out there, but I think we should mention it here. Isabel Granger was promoted to inspector. Was she promoted because of the quantity of her street checks? Or was she promoted because of the content of her character, her professionalism, her qualifications? And if that's the grounds we're using to promote our officers, then that is how we should do for all of these recommendations. So thank you very much for your time. You can steal my book later.
Awesome, thank you.
I just want to make one very, very quick point around awareness. I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm chair of the Truro Police Commission, president of Nova Scotia Association of Police Governors, and I'm on the board of the Canadian Association of Police Governors. Last year, I was carded in Halifax, and I had no idea what my rights were.
Thank you.
So
Wow.
what about
Point made,
the general
yes.
public?
Point made, thank you. Thank you. Oh. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir à tous. So, unfortunately, members of our table did have to leave, but what resonated with the table was they had a few questions. The question that we're now thinking about after hearing everybody is, will banning street checks really make a difference? We need this review to actually find a way to stop racial profiling of our racialized and indigenous communities. How do we stop racial profiling? How do we legislate how police should do their jobs? Can we do that? Is that even possible? How do we change the police culture? And something that we came up with was tangible training, but not just talking points or another box that you check off, but something that actually works, but also laws on racial profiling, because rules and policies are easily broken and always broken, but there hasn't been anything done to actually, like, where are the consequences for that? Relationships, we found, are a two-way street. Attitude is a huge thing. There needs to be a crackdown on the actual practice and not just the naming of the practice, because the practice name changes all the time and it's the same thing every time. Essentially, the behaviors need to change. There needs to be more accountability and transparency. The public should be aware of things and they need to know what's going on. The goal of the police organizations, as mentioned before, is building relationships, but carding destroys that. Lines are blurred on the issue of carding and street checking, especially around the new regulations. Clarification is definitely needed. We, as the members of the table, agreed that education and training is needed for the police, but also on the public with their rights, especially for the vulnerable communities, racialized and priority neighborhoods. Because essentially these are the people who are affected, but yet they don't know their basic rights. Receipts seem to be a good idea, but no one at this table has heard of it or has seen it. And if there are going to be receipts, it needs to be standardized across the province or across the country. It shouldn't be different for each province or different between each police organization. It should be uniformed. It should be simple to identify and know what a receipt is. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So on behalf of myself and the team, Justice Tulloch will have the last word. I just want to say this was a fruitful conversation. You all, this is number 11 out of 12, so we've been through it, and this was a really high level and high quality conversation, we just wanted to say. So thank you, Ottawa, and thank you for, again, pushing through the weather to be here today, because I think you believe, like we do, that this is an extremely important issue, and you needed to have your say and be heard. And Justice Tulloch, over to you for the last word. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again, Kike, for facilitating this portion of the discussions. Again, I want to thank each and every one that is here in this room that, like I said, made the sacrifice to be here and to engage in my view, a very positive and thought-wrenching discussion on a very, very difficult issue. For those of you who participated, it's a real issue for you, and I've heard you all loud and clear, and your thoughts, your comments, and your recommendations will be, well, I have been writing them down, by the way, and I would ask that you also submit them to us so that we can capture pretty much everything that you have said. And I can assure you that it is going to be reflected, it's going to be considered by me and reflected in some way, shape, or form in the report that will ultimately be written at the end of this review. For those of you that have come far outside of the province, I understand there are people here from across Canada. I want to welcome you to Ontario, and certainly thank you for coming out to this consultative process. Those of you who have traveled outside of Ottawa, again, we thank you for making the sacrifice to come. And it's important that we have this conversation. It's important that the community understand, not just the community, but the police and the community have a dialogue, and a very, very honest and open dialogue on these issues. Because unless there is this dialogue, then we're not going to have any kind of meaningful solution to the impasse on this particular issue. So I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, we will put our minds together and come up with a meaningful solution that does not in any way disproportionately affects or disproportionately discriminate against segments of our communities and our society. And that everyone understand that these sentiments are real to the communities that are voicing them. Again, I thank you very much for your comments, and have a safe trip back to wherever you're from. Thank you.